Hello and welcome to today's webinar introducing the 2020 ATM and Self-Service Software Trends Report, presented by KAL ATM Software and hosted by ATM Marketplace. I'm Suzanne Cluckey for ATM Marketplace. Today we'll be taking a first look at the 13th Annual Software Trends Report, which is being released today and will be available for free download at atmmarketplace.com immediately after the webinar. As with previous editions, the 2020 report provides a valuable resource for financial institutions as they consider how self-service fits into the larger picture of omnichannel service delivery at their organization. Today, we'll look at findings that spell out current ATM features and technologies and new functionalities designed to enhance the customer experience, branch transformation and rationalization, and the challenges and opportunities these present for the ATM channel, and recurring issues around Windows operating system upgrades. We'll have some time at the end of the hour for Q&A if you have any questions about the study's findings. What you'll need to do is just click on the chat icon on your screen at any time in the webinar and type in your question, and we will get your question answered as, we'll answer as many questions as we can before the end of the hour. Our presenter today is Steve Hensley, Worldwide Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing at KAL, and a member of the KAL Board of Directors. Steve has more than 25 years of experience in the IT industry and has held numerous sales and management positions before joining KAL. He also has been involved in the financial industry with a focus on self-service solutions, including ATMs and kiosks. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Suzanne. How are you?
Good. I know our listeners are anxious to know the results of this year's study, so let's just get right to it.
All right, let's do. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody all around the world. Suzanne, as she said, this is our 13th annual publication of this report. So I hope all of you have followed the many reports and seen the changes over the years. We'll talk about that as we go through it. The other thing I wanted to mention is that this is the 9th annual webinar that we've done. So each year that we do this guide, we've always published it through ATM Marketplace, Networld Alliance. It's always been a free download. It's always been a great resource for people to see what's going on in the industry. And we've always done this. And I think this is very important to do these webinars and talk about the results and share them with you. So what I'd like to do is talk to you first about how we do this guide, the report, and what's behind it, which I think you will find interesting. So it's sponsored by KAL. Suzanne is the writer of the report, and going into the report, we have two main segments. One segment was done pre-pandemic. And that was the online survey. And we got over 500 responses on the online survey. It took about 10 minutes for people to complete it. So it wasn't that complicated. We'd love to ask 1,000 questions, but people don't have the patience for that. But we did get over 500 responses, which was great. And then the second part of the input to the report is that we interview industry executives from all over the world. So we've got, great contacts with people all over the world. We asked them to participate in the report. And we had this year the most interviews with industry executives that we've ever had. And we'll share some excerpts from what people had to say during this presentation. So what we're going to do is present the summary of the results from the online survey, some of the excerpts from the interviews, and then, as was mentioned in the introduction to the webinar, the report is going to be published as we speak, and it's available as a free download via ATM Marketplace. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, the first question we always ask is to identify your industry segment. We do this for one main reason. We really are interested in what banks are thinking about their ATM channel, but we also want to see what other industry participants think as well. So we ask them that question so we can segment the responses. What we're going to do in this webinar is focus on the bank responses. It'll be representative of all the responses, but we're really going to focus on the banks. And the number of responses that we got this year was significantly up over the previous years. And like I said, the one interesting aspect to it is we did the online survey part in January, February, before the pandemic hit. I think if we would have done it later, people had a little more idle time and we would have had perhaps even a lot more responses. But we got very good response from people all around the world. So another question that we always ask is, what region are you based in? Historically, this has been heavily North America, South America responses, but that changed. This year, Asia and Africa represented 43% of all the responses, and I think that's absolutely terrific. There are, as you know, some very large banks with very large ATM networks throughout Asia, and we were very interested to get the responses from them. But more or less, you can see that the distribution of the responses was pretty even around the world. The other thing that we wanted to know is how many ATMs do you have? And this has been consistent across all of the surveys that we've done, that we get a lot of participation from banks that have big ATM fleets. So as you can see, 1/3 of the respondents had more than 2,000 ATMs. And again, we're focusing on the bank deployers, not so much on the IADs and not so much on the other people in the industry. But the bank deployers, about 1/3 have very, very large fleets, as you can see, and about 27% have relatively small fleets. So a good cross-section of fleet size represented in the response. The next thing that we wanted to know, we wanted to get a feel for what's being done in the industry today. And we didn't ask basic questions like, do you support fundamental basic ATM features, cash withdrawals or deposits or that kind of thing. What we wanted to do is go more toward the advanced functionality. And we segmented this into what features are you supporting today, what you already support, and then what technologies are you supporting today? And then we'll look at, in the near future, what features, what technologies are you going to support? So let's look at the ATM functionality today. So the question that we asked was, which of the following features does your bank already support? And they could select all that applied. And as you can see, the #1 response was teller transactions at the ATM. Now, this is something that's been going on now for a number of years, and that's a migration of transactions from the teller counter to ATMs. But some trends are starting to emerge that you can see here. For example, support for e-receipts and pre-staged transactions. While not huge numbers, those are growing very, very significantly. So you're starting to see the impact of mobile technology on the ATM channel. But generally speaking, the advanced technologies advanced features that we see in the ATM channel is the movement, the migration of transactions that have been historically done at the teller counter toward the ATM. And we're going to see more of that in future, when we look at future features that are supported. The next part we wanted to look at is the technologies that are supported today. So features are one thing, functionality like marketing and so forth is one thing, but what technologies are you supporting today that can be leveraged to support these new transactions? And a couple were very interesting. So if you look on the left-hand side of the screen at a couple of the technologies, one thing that you'll see is cardless transactions. And that was #1, is a technology that people are supporting today. In cardless transactions, as you know, you don't need to use your card and a PIN to access the ATM, but you can do things like emergency cash, you can deposit on behalf of other people. So there are different transactions that you can do at the ATM that don't require a card and PIN. If you look also, cash recycling at 48% is interesting, the technology supported today. Cash recycling in certain regions is a must-have. So cash recycling in the Asian region is a must-have. Cash recycling in a lot of European countries is a must-have. Cash recycling in the Americas, not so much. We see a big interest in cash recycling, but not nearly to the level of some of the other regions. The other thing I want to point out on here is if you look at contactless and cardless transactions, these are supported today. Contactless tap and go with cards, tap and go with phones is a technology that some banks are supporting today, which I think is going to lead to new ways of doing transactions on ATMs that will become ubiquitous around the world. One other thing to point out on this slide is about security. So there's a TPM chip that KAL has written a lot about with white papers on our website, talking about the use of a TPM and what it will do to help it encrypt hard disk and to help security at the ATM. And as you can see there, 22% said they support TPM technology today. I think a lot of people may not be aware of what it is, and it's a very important topic that we're writing a lot about and trying to educate the industry about. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Now let's look at over the next few years. So we looked at features that are supported today, technologies that are supported today, but where are banks going? And so we asked them, which of the following new features does your bank plan to support over the next few years, and select all of them that apply. And again, if you look over the next few years, the technologies that banks are really focused on are pre-staging transactions and e-receipts. And you could think in terms of that being use of mobile phones and the integration of mobile phones, mobile technology with the ATM channel. So what we see is that that's going to become even much more important over the next few years. E-receipts, of course, could be sent to a desktop, laptop, but also to your mobile phone. Then if you look at some of the other things, there's equal interest, I would say, in doing targeted marketing, providing emergency cash for people who lose their card, continued work on teller transactions at ATMs, supporting preferences to make the ATM experience better. And you're going to see that in future questions in this presentation, that the user experience is getting a lot of attention at banks around the world, and how to improve the user experience and make it a more sticky experience, if you will. So people stay with your bank, don't move to other banks, and things like customer preferences and targeted marketing, those kind of things really help the user experience. One of the things I've been a little surprised at is a technology that banks are kind of lukewarm to at this point, is providing remote assistance for people at ATMs. So as we move transactions from the teller counter to ATMs, some of those transactions are a little more complex than typically seen at ATMs, and people may not be comfortable doing those transactions initially at ATMs and might need assistance. And we think that technology is interesting, that it's either a video assistance or audio assistance or some remote assistance to help you through that transaction. But as you can see here, that's not something that is as interesting or was identified as being as interesting as some of these other features. Now, if we look at technologies, I thought this was really very interesting. And this, again, was pre-pandemic. If we would take this in today's world, if we would ask that same question, which of the following new ATM features and technologies, which technologies does your bank plan to support over the next few years? Contactless would probably be 100%. We, as a ATM software company, we're getting asked that by banks around the world. We want to do more with contactless. We want people to touch the ATM as infrequently as possible, just to touch the cash, to pull it out, and to be able to tap their card or tap their phone, and be able to use a phone, for example, for authentication. Contactless is something that is very, very interesting to people, and has increased in importance and significance since March. The other thing I wanted to point out is one thing that is much more interesting, one technology that's much more interesting to people today than historically has been true, is biometrics. 46% on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see 46% identified that the banks plan to support biometrics over the next few years. This is palm vein recognition, fingerprint recognition, iris recognition, facial recognition, lots of different technologies that use biometrics that people are going to be seeing at ATMs. And in fact, we have a large customer using facial recognition at the ATM to identify their customers. And I think we're going to see that probably more and more. So these are some of the technologies that people think are interesting. You see TPM again on the right-hand side got 30% response. That people are focused on security, increasing security, and the TPM chip is critical to that. And again, I encourage you to go to our website, cal.com, and look at the writings that our security team has done on TPM technology. It's very, very interesting. So in addition to doing an online survey, and we have more questions that we'll go through on the online survey, we also interviewed industry executives, bank executives involved in the ATM space. We interviewed them around the world. And we asked a bunch of different questions. And as you can guess, many bankers are reluctant to speak or can't speak on behalf of the bank. And we said, no, we don't really want you to do that. What we really want is, because you're in the industry and you understand the industry, we want your opinion. We want you to tell us what you think about some of these. You don't need to be speaking for the bank, speak for yourself. And let us ask you some questions. And so we had over 50 people, industry executives, bank executives, that participated in these interviews. And I excerpt some of the things that they said from the interviews. You can read a lot more of their thoughts in the Trends Guide when you download it. But here are some of the ones that are more or less indicative of a lot of the responses. So as you can see on the responses on the left-hand side, mobile apps are increasingly widespread and developing functions we couldn't imagine a few years ago. Pre-staged transactions are interesting, that they can create a better user experience. That's a theme that you're going to see more and more and more of, is a better user experience, and using technologies like mobile transactions, pre-staging, to increase or make better user experience. Pre-stage transactions with mobile wallet applications is a top priority, and contactless cash withdrawals, immediate need of the hour, on and on and on. Now, these interviews were done after March. So no doubt the state of the world influenced a lot of the responses here, but you can see that the importance of the integration of mobile technologies with ATM technologies and creating that great user experience is very, very important. Now I want to turn it over to Suzanne. We're going to ask you some questions. So Suzanne, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. We're going to launch a poll here, and we would like to know from our audience what you think about this particular question. How has the pandemic impacted ATM-related projects for you? We have several answers, and I'm going to go ahead and launch this little pop-up screen here so that we can get this underway, if it'll go. There we go. Okay, so launching poll number 1. So your potential answers here are: we are continuing our 2020 projects as budgeted and planned with little or no impact, or we have delayed most or all of our ATM projects, or we are not sure when we will resume planned projects, or we are evaluating our future plans and budgets, and we may get out, or reevaluating our future plans. Budgets may be reallocated for non-ATM projects, and I have no idea. So I'm going to give you a little time to think of and input your answer. And while we wait for responses, I want to remind you that you can submit questions at any time during the webinar by clicking the chat icon on your screen and then typing your question into the pop-up box. We'll do our best to get to all audience questions during the Q&A session. Also, in case you joined us a little late today, I want to let you know that this presentation, including the slide deck, will be available for replay at atmmarketplace.com. We'll send you an email with a link to the replay, which you're welcome to share with any colleagues who could not make today's event. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the 2020 ATM Software Trends Report will be available for free download at atmmarketplace.com immediately after the webinar. And a link directly to the download will be included in the replay notification email. Let's see where we are with our poll answers. Okay, looks like we've got about everybody in now, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So there we are, Steve. This is what we came up with.
Well, it's interesting. So it looks like 51% said they're continuing as budgeted and planned with little or no impact. We are seeing a lot of ATM project activity all around the world. There is, of course, impact. I mean, a lot of times when you deploy things, you have to test, and you can test on virtual machines and so forth. But ATMs are unique in that things need to be tested on ATMs. So there can be time impacts, and we see that in terms of how quickly projects can be deployed. But it's interesting, 51% said they're little or no impact on the things that they're doing. The next is we've delayed most of our projects until 2021, 14%. I'm surprised that number is not a little bit bigger. Because we do hear that from banks about certain projects and so forth. And, you know, some of the projects that we see are conversion projects that are big projects, and maybe the bigger projects see some delay, but the smaller projects, like adding a feature or a transaction, really aren't as impacted as much. And that's interesting too. And we're not sure when people will resume planned projects, 6%. That means that 94% are sure when they'll resume the projects and so forth. So probably less impact than I would have thought, which I think is an interesting result. So, okay, that's good. Thanks, Suzanne.
Mm-hmm. You bet.
Okay, let's go back to the questions now. And the next question, which is question 8, is about, we talked about the features that are supported and the technologies. Then we talked about future plans, the technologies, the features, and so forth. And now we wanted to focus in on if there's one thing that you could improve, one aspect of the ATM channel that you could work on and improve, which would it be? And there's no real consensus here, as you can see, but when you start looking at the numbers and combining things together that are similar, you do start seeing some things. So if you look at increased availability, the number's not there, but it's 28%. Adding features, 18%, and improving customer experience, 19%. All of those could be grouped together in improving the overall experience of the customer at the ATM. It's more available, the better user interface, new features. So that is, that really is the #1 trend that we're seeing from the responses to the survey, to the questions and so forth. Now, one interesting thing I've lived through all of these ATM reports and webinars and so forth. And one thing that is a big change is that managing costs, lowering operational costs, reducing capital expenditure. You can see it's still important. There's 23% of the people said it got to be better with cost and so forth. But 5 years ago, well, from 2010 to about 2015, that number would have been 75%. So it's like we've gotten control of the cost somewhat in the ATM industry. We've improved, we really streamlined cost and managing costs and so forth. And now it's more of an external focus. And the external focus is how do we provide a better experience for our customers. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting is transaction speed. It's a big deal in the ATM industry. You know, you don't want queues of people at the ATM, but only 2% here identified it as the #1 thing that we really need to work on and improve. So most people must feel that the speed of the ATMs and how fast customers can do transactions is not bad. Is not bad. Okay. So the next interview question that we asked was, in what ways should the ATM channel be improved over the next few years? The one on the left, greater importance will be given to enhancing security, reducing costs, but also improving the user interface. So the user interface and security are very important topics. The response in the lower middle section is about user experience, the customer interface, and I don't know what area this person is from, but most ATMs look as they did at the beginning of the millennium. I don't know if you could say that about the whole industry, but certainly some regions and certainly some banks, that is very true. So again, the customer interface focus on that. Costs still are important. Costs have to be decreased. And the cost, of course, on the right-hand side, leading the financial industry to outsource ATMs and services, again, to get their hands around the cost of providing the service. One other area that we've looked at over the past 5 years is the evolution, the movement of branch closures, and how many banks have reduced or rationalized, optimized the number of branches that they have, and the branches that are low volume, banks have closed them. And we're saying, what are you doing with the ATM channel to provide an alternative for branch services, considering the branch closures? And as you can see on the left-hand side, there is a very significant trend. Banks are either or increasing the number of ATMs that they provide and changing the mix of ATMs from cash out to full function ATMs. So the type of ATM that that they're putting in place can do more types of transactions. So if you have to visit a branch for whatever reason, you might have to travel a little further, but do transactional things. As you can see, there's perhaps an increase in ATMs or replacing cash out with full function ATMs. Some banks are looking at adding remote teller functionality to deliver new services. So banks have been doing this now for a number of years, 5 years or so, where a lot of banks in a lot of regions have, again, optimized their branch network, reducing the number of branches and putting in more full function ATMs, and in some cases, growing their network. What we don't see, and we've asked this over the years, is banks removing a lot of ATMs, and they may not increase their network, but they're certainly not decreasing their network, at least in a lot of regions. So we asked the executives, given recent branch closures, what should banks do to the ATM channel to provide alternatives? Some people thought on the left-hand side, video teller machines will come to the fore, and they want to talk to somebody live when they need it, so they'll use that. The bottom center quote is about agreements with retailers to improve the cash supply. And there's an idea that, in certain villages, towns, and so forth, retailers could work with deployers to provide alternative ways of dispensing cash to customers. So there's POS with cash back, but there's also the idea of using a very inexpensive machine, doing a transaction, getting a receipt, handing it to getting a ticket, handing it to the retailer, and the retailer gives you cash for that ticket without having to purchase goods. So there's a lot of alternative ideas on how to provide more services, more availability to cash. On the right-hand side, I thought this one was interesting, that this person said ATMs are ATMs that don't change their purpose. If we add more functionality, we'll add it on mobile banking, home banking, and so forth. So I thought that was very, very interesting. Generally, if we looked at all of the responses, generally it was that ATMs need to do more. They become more essential, more critical, and in providing transactional services to bank customers. So Suzanne, over to you. We have another poll question.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We're going to launch another poll here, and
oops.
Oh dear. Did I just advance you?
Yeah, it's
Or
okay. Just leave it there.
okay, so there we are. Okay, we're going to launch poll question number 2. And this time we want to know what you see as the future of bank branches over the next 5 to 10 years. Will banks increase the number of branches? Will they maintain about the same number of branches? Will they somewhat reduce the number of branches? Will they significantly reduce the number of branches? And I have no idea. So I'm going to launch this poll and let you input your answer. And while you do that, I'm going to once again do a little housekeeping here and let you know that you can submit your questions at any time during the webinar. We hope that if you have anything that you want to know about the study or related subjects, we hope that you'll open that chat box on your screen and type in your question for us, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the hour. And I also wanted to let you know that if you joined us a little late, you'll be able to catch up on the first part that you missed because we'll be posting today's presentation, including the slide deck, at atmmarketplace.com. You'll receive an email link with the replay link, and you are welcome to share this link with anyone who was not able to attend the webinar today. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the 2020 ATM Software Trends Report will be available for free download at atmmarketplace.com immediately after the webinar. And we will also include a link to that, directly to that document in the replay notification. When you receive that, just look for both of those links. So let's see where we are, Steve, with the poll responses. It looks like people have pretty much gotten their responses in. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results with everyone. And this is what we came up with.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and it's consistent with what we've seen over the past 5 years or so. So banks aren't going to increase the number of branches. So very few people think that that's going to happen. And 17% thought banks would maintain about the same number of branches. Most people thought banks will somewhat reduce the branches, or banks will significantly reduce the branches. So we had 79% said we have too many branches and they're going to be reduced either somewhat or significantly. And everybody had an idea. So no one said, I have no idea. Everybody knows about this and had an idea. And it looks like it's consistent with what we're seeing in the industry, that the number of branches is going to go down, but access to the transactions and so forth is going to be consistent. And people need access to ATMs, and their role is going to be as important, if not more important, going forward. Okay, so we can close that.
All right.
And let's now look at a couple of other areas. One thing that I mentioned was that during the period of 2010 to 2015 or so, there was a great focus on cost. How do we improve maintenance operations? How do we improve cash in transit and improve the overall cost effectiveness of the channel? And we've done a good job relatively in the industry with doing that. And part of what's helped do that is having remote visibility to the ATMs and remote visibility to what's going on in the operations and what ATMs are in service, out of service, what ATMs need maintenance, what ATMs have tickets open, and all of that. So systems like CAL's KTC system give banks great visibility as to what's going on, and that visibility has a direct impact on how cost effective you're managing that ATM channel. So this is pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past. Doesn't like me, Suzanne.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. So we asked the executives, what would you do to make the ATM channel as cost efficient as possible? One interesting response, and there were more than one. We interviewed 50 different people, but one thing that was identified is cash recycling. And one person said it's the business secret to really be efficient about this. So we all know what cash recycling is. I mean, you can take deposited notes, recycle them, and dispense those same notes to other customers, and it reduces the number of times you need to replenish the ATM. It's a very, very interesting technology that's used in a lot of the world. So I thought that was interesting. As you can see, ATM should be used for money withdrawal and deposit and integrated with mobile. And they wanted to make the ATM as streamlined, make it just basically the dispenser part, no screen, no card. ATM should be more common. And we've seen experiments with those, but they're not common anywhere in the world right now. But I thought that was an interesting comment. And what I mentioned on the previous slide, someone echoes here, which is the availability of high quality, accurate monitoring with the ability to respond quickly is core to having a cost efficient operation for your ATM, and then doing more digital transactions and adding new services as well. Okay. One thing that Susan and I talked about as she was drafting the guide, and it was the impact of the pandemic on this survey, on people's responses. And Susan made an interesting comment, which is this guide would have been focused on Windows 10, Windows 10 upgrade, Windows 10 migration, had it not been for the pandemic so much. That got in the way of these things, and cost, and being able to deliver new services, and being able to do cardless and contactless transactions, and those kind of ideas and thoughts really penetrated this guide. And you'll see that in the writing of the guide, which, as Susan said, is going to be available today. And I really, really encourage you to get it. It's very, very well done. But if you look at alternatives, so banks, some banks have said that they have already migrated to Windows 10. I don't know the percentage. The vendors, maybe the hardware vendors could tell you, or I don't know the percentage that have already migrated to Windows 10, but some have. But if you look at this, 41% of the banks are going to migrate to Windows 10 in the near future. So some already have, some plan to do it. But if you look at 16% on the upper right-hand pie, they're going to run Windows 7 and pay Microsoft for extended support for as long as they can. So there are a lot of people, though, around the world looking at alternatives. And that includes our hypervisor idea that you should look on our website again. There's a paper about the hypervisor and a lot of information. And that basically is introducing Linux into the ATM space and running the Windows 10 software in a virtual machine. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about that, but it presents a migration path to the future that I think you should educate yourself about if you haven't already. That is very interesting. So let's move on. The other area we wanted to ask about, we're just touching on all these areas. There's much more detail in the guide when you download that, but I'm going to touch on a few things. So one that we asked about was ATM security. And we said from a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I'm not at all convinced that our ATM security is good, to 10, where I am extremely comfortable with the security of our ATM. We had people rank it. And I didn't put the percentages on this slide, but basically 28% said we are extremely confident in the overall ATM security. 23% said, well, we're 9 out of 10 confident, and 34% said we're 8 out of 10. So over 80% of the respondents said we're pretty confident in the security of our ATM. And having said that, we're all educating ourselves more and more about security. And again, I encourage you to read our security team's paper on our website about TPMs and the use of TPMs. It's very, very enlightening and educational. So I highly encourage you to do that. But for those people that said not at all, or a little bit confident, but not really very confident, you better take the action and get to a point where you are very, very confident. And anyway, so we talked about security to the executives and got some interesting responses to that. Then we turned our focus to what's your priority for your ATM network over the next few years? And you can see there's really no consensus on highest priority, but on the lower right-hand side, you can see migrating transactions from the teller counter to ATMs is a high priority. And then there's a variety of different responses about improving customer experience, lower cost, improving security, but there was no real clear single consensus about the highest priority over the next few years. We also talked about physically delivering cash to customers. Are you looking at any alternative strategies for doing this? We talked about that briefly a few minutes ago. So some people said that they are promoting more POS with cash back to make cash more readily available. But other people around the world are looking at lower cost options. Like I mentioned to you, getting a ticket at a very inexpensive machine and giving it to the retailer to get your cash over the counter without necessarily having to purchase any items. Those kind of ideas are interesting that people are looking at as alternative strategies to delivering cash, and we'd be happy to talk to you more about those kind of ideas if you're interested in knowing more about them. Suzanne, we have one more poll question, so over to you.
All right, thanks, Steve. And I'm not sure why that does that, but we will bring up the third poll question here. And this question for our audience is, how has the pandemic impacted your personal use of cash? Either it's had no impact, I use cash the same as I always have, or limited impact, I still use cash but less frequently than before, or significant impact, now I use cash much less frequently than before the pandemic, I never use cash now, or you're not sure. And for my part, I think the answer would be no impact. I use cash just about the same.
Same with me, yep.
While we wait for responses to the poll, I'm going to go through our housekeeping items one more time and let you know that you could submit your question if you have any questions about the study or any of the contents of the study, or just generally about the industry while we've got Steve here today. You can open the Q&A window on your screen, and in that little chat box, just type in your question, and we'll get to as many of those as we can before the end of the hour. And also, in case you joined us a little late, I wanted to let you know that today's presentation, including the slide deck, will be available at atmmarketplace.com for replay. You'll get an email with a link to that, and also in the link, or in the email, you'll get a link to the 2020 Software Trends Report, which will be available for free download immediately after the webinar. If you want it right away and don't want to wait for the email, just go to atmmarketplace.com and you'll find links to that online. Let's see where we are with our poll answers, and it looks like we've got just about everybody in, Steve, so I'm going to end the poll here and we can have a look at the results. Still use cash, but less frequently than before.
Yeah, so for the cashless world, the bottom response is pretty good. I never use cash now. 5% of people said that. So 95% of us still use cash, and it looks like there is either no or limited impact is 65% of the responses. Although 30% said there is a significant impact, I use it much less frequently than before. So interesting, but as you can see, and this is said by everybody that we talk to in terms of cash and cash distribution and cash usage and so forth, that it's as important as it always has been, even though there's a lot of other ways to pay today. Cash is still here with us and used by basically everybody. Okay, so let's close that.
All right.
Okay, the final two questions focus on ATM software, and that's of course particular interest to to KAL because that's what we do. We hear a lot of people talk about cloud-based ATM software, and I don't know that anybody knows what it's going to do in the cloud, but they want it in the cloud. And the question was, do you plan that your next generation of ATM software will be cloud-based? And 50% said yes. So cloud-based technology, even though we didn't really ask, well, why is it important that it's in the cloud? What about, what are you going to do with it in the cloud? And how does it affect the architecture of the software and so forth? We didn't go into those levels of detail. But people generally said yes. Half the people said our next generation of ATM software will be cloud-based. 23% said no, it won't be cloud-based. And of course, a quarter of the people really didn't know whether it would be or not. So I thought that was very interesting. And the next slide.
See if I can get us there, Steve.
The last slide. Okay, thanks. This is the final question. We ask, how frequently would you like to update your ATM software in the future? So, we asked some architectural software questions like cloud-based or not cloud-based, what features and functions, what technologies are you interested in, and so forth. And this one I thought was really interesting. And this is a conversation, of course, because of our relationship with our customers that we get into often with the customers. And this has really changed over the 13 years that we've been doing this software trends guide. Historically, banks didn't want to touch their ATM software because it meant dispatching a technician to the ATM, doing an update, taking it out of service while it's doing the update, and then going on to the next one and the next one. And if you have a few hundred or a few thousand ATMs, that's an awful process. So they did it as infrequently as possible. And, in many cases, once a year, in some cases, twice a year or quarterly, but not frequently. And then you think about your mobile phone, or you think about your, apps on your home PC or laptop, and you think about how often these companies are updating the software, new features and new twist and a new that, and they're keeping them fresh, and they're putting security features into it to protect you and so forth. Banks want their ATM channel to be like the other channels. They want to be able to update the ATM software as frequently as you do other channels. So very frequently, like every few weeks doing updates was the overwhelming response to our question about how frequently would you like to do this. So banks want to have this development and operations teams work together with the software technology provider, create fast changes, updates, keep the ATM software fresh, the user interface fresh, the security software fresh, and so forth to keep it on the same level as the home banking application, as the mobile banking application, in look and feel and in freshness, if you will, in keeping it up to date and so forth. So I think that's a trend that we're going to see more and more in the future, is being able to do this. And the way you have to do this, of course, is through automation, through technology, and having a management system, which of course we have with our KTC system, to be able to remotely push software out and update ATMs without having to dispatch anybody, and to make it a painless process instead of a very expensive and painful process. So that was the final question that we asked. If we could then, and that's really the conclusion of the formal presentation for the webinar. So I'd like to thank everybody. We could see if there's some questions that people have asked.
Yeah, Steve, we actually do have a couple questions here. I want to initially go back to the question of cash. And I'm curious to know what you're hearing from your customers about anticipated cash use, over the long-term future. I know that digital transactions have increased since the pandemic, and I'm wondering, are you seeing that your customers, or what's your impression about the long-term effects of that on cash use?
Well, we see a lot of information about transaction volumes around the world and average withdrawal amounts and so forth. And the volumes are basically the level. They're not increasing, they're not decreasing, they're about the same everywhere. But the average withdrawal amount is increasing. So people have cash, and if you listen to presentations by central bankers, they'll say there's more cash in circulation today than there ever has been. It keeps increasing. And then what they look at is the amount of cash you have on your person, in your purse, in your wallet, and the amount of cash that you have in a secure location like your house, in a safe or whatever. And the numbers are increasing. You know that people carry about the same amount of cash, but they are very liquid and have cash readily available without, you know, they go to the ATM, they get the money, they put some in their on their person, you know, in a billfold or wallet or whatever, and then put some in a easy, secure locations that they can get very quickly. So we see it being very, very stable. But, you know, there's a lot of noise about cashless societies, and a lot of noise about countries that are doing away with cash. And we just don't see that as being viable. We don't see it as a global, you know, global trend at all. But there are other ways to pay for certain things that are very convenient. People are going to use those. So I hope I answered part of your question anyway.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think it's really changed my use habits. You know, of course, initially everybody was locked down; we couldn't go anyplace, so
Yeah.
that did have an impact. But I still carry cash, and I still use it on occasion,
Yeah.
pretty much as I always have.
Yeah.
So, great. Well, I have a couple other questions for you here. Let's see. This is an interesting one pertaining to Windows. Ernesto asks, do you think ATM applications will migrate from Windows to Linux? And if yes, when? And I know you have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question, and it's something that the industry's been talking about for some time. The quick answer is in some places there will be a mix. In the future, there'll be a mix of Windows applications, Windows ATMs running Windows with Windows applications, and ATMs running Linux with Linux-based applications. The challenge to get there is a couple things. One is today there aren't Linux-based ATM applications. There's not, you know, there's a whole infrastructure around Windows. In addition to the ATM application, there's all the supporting systems and so forth, and technologies that are Windows-based. So those have to be redone, rebuilt using Linux or other operating systems, and that's going to take a long time. The other key part of this is that the drivers in the ATMs, the software drivers in the ATMs that control the cash dispenser and the card reader and the ATM peripheral devices are built on Windows and by the manufacturers. There aren't Linux versions of those things today. Now, that standard is called XFS, and there is a future version of XFS being worked on. We're part of the XFS committee, and it's being worked on, that the software drivers to the devices are agnostic to the operating system. That's the future direction. So those software drivers controlling the cash dispenser and the card reader and so forth could run under Windows, or they could run under Linux. And then you can start seeing some migration from Windows-based applications to Linux-based applications. But there's a huge amount of investment that the industry's made in Windows-based applications. So it's going to take some time. So the win is down the road. It's going to be a while.
Yeah, not anytime soon. Yeah.
Not anytime soon.
Okay. So let's see, moving on to some additional questions here. What have we got? Going back to, just kind of going back to some of the survey responses that we received, was there anything that really stuck out to you about respondents' feelings and attitudes about ATM growth over the next few years, or is it pretty much what you expected to see?
No, it's pretty much what we've expected. It's the evolution of the ATM channel is over long terms. It's a reliable device system that we all know, we all trust, we all understand how to use it. And so there's a slow evolution. There are trials of things that happen, that we look at and say, well, that could be interesting, but the core functionality of the ATM is, tried and true and tested and so forth. And it's not really changing all that much. What we're doing is adding new functionality to it. So it evolves over a long time. Like I said, 2010 to 2015, it was about how do we reduce costs? How can we remotely do stuff to manage our cost and so forth? And now it's a lot of it's user experience, using new technologies like Angular and React and so forth for the user experience. So the ATM user experience is very responsive, much like a mobile phone. So that's the focus of the industry. But it takes a long time for these trends to evolve. But this user experience trend, I think, is going to be with us for some time.
Okay, great. And finally, I want to ask one more pandemic-related question. I know that there's, it's been such a dominant theme this year in everything. And you said that when we asked that poll question, you were kind of surprised at the results because you were hearing from more banks that things were being put on hold. And I just wanted you to elaborate a little more on what you're hearing in the industry about progress, when everybody's working remotely and it's gotten a little more complicated to get things done.
Yeah, the big challenge with ATMs is testing. So, there are certain things that you do with ATMs that require minimal testing, and you can test it on virtual machines, or you don't need to be on the ATM itself. But, many banks locked down their facilities from March until, June or so, that nobody could get into the facility. And to be able to properly test before you do something big, like put a new type of ATM on the network or a big feature that uses, add cash recycling or whatever it happens to be, you need to test it not only on an ATM, but on an ATM within the bank network. And, the banks slowly started letting people get back into their labs. That was their people plus our people to get back in the labs, get their hands on machines. And now there's much better access. So I think if we talked about this in, in March and April, people would have said, "Oh no, you can't get in our labs. We can't do anything." But now people are getting access, so things are opening up a little bit. So I think we're going to stay in this mode for a while.
Yeah. So kind of figuring out some workarounds and still getting things done. It's just been a little difficult getting there.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. And
You're welcome.
Is going to have to wrap it up for today for this presentation. But I want to thank KAL ATM Software again for sponsoring today's webinar and for co-sponsoring the 2020 ATM and Self-Service Software Trends Guide. Also, thanks to Steve for a great presentation, and a big thanks to all of our listeners for spending an hour of their day with us.
Yeah.
Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.